dive event variables. Sometimes in Google Tag Manager, you need to be able to take an action at a very specific time. Event variables can help with that. You'll see exactly how to use them in this lesson. Let's take a look.
All right, it's a deep dive JavaScript variables. Lesson objectives for today is really to cover the two main JavaScript variables that are available to you in Google Tag Manager. One is just called that, the JavaScript variable, and the other is the custom JavaScript variable. We're going to be covering both of those today. The journey so far, we just covered table variables, including both lookup and regex tables. Now we're going to be covering both types of JavaScript variables that are available to us in GTM. Then we'll move on to the different event variables and using cookies and move toward wrapping up. Right now though, JavaScript variables, remember there are two in Google Tag Manager, two primary ones. There's the regular JavaScript variable and there's something called the custom JavaScript variable. I'm going to show you where those are. So we're going to go to our variables, and as we scroll down, these are all going to be user defined. So what we're looking for is right here is the JavaScript variable, and here is the custom JavaScript variable. Now the JavaScript variable itself, pretty basic. It just looks for a global variable. It's already been defined that the browser has access to, and that's what you can use to pull in a value. I'll show you that in just a moment. The custom JavaScript variable, if we go back into that here, it looks a little bit like our custom HTML tag, but in this case, it's custom JavaScript. So we can actually copy and paste JavaScript in here or write our own JavaScript in here so that the function itself returns a value that becomes the value of the variable itself. So let's go ahead and move on some of these here. So I will warn you as we go through between custom JavaScript and JavaScript, code alert. There's definitely going to be some code. If you are, again, not consider yourself a technical individual, that's okay. You have to get familiar with JavaScript. You don't need to be an expert. You don't need to be better at JavaScript than your developer is, but you should be familiar with JavaScript. And this is one of those variables that in experiencing and in playing with this variable, in practicing this particular variable, these two different types of variables, you will by default become more familiar with JavaScript and how to use it. So do not shy away from these. These are something, again, that are necessary that you're going to want to play with. I'm actually going to dive right in to code. And we're going to grab this particular custom JavaScript because I think this is just a really good one to show you what this is like. So this is the custom JavaScript variable that we pulled from Simo Ahava. He wrote a great post on the macro magic for Google Tag Manager back when variables were called macros. So that tells you about how long this has been around. But this is a piece of code that he wrote that essentially goes in and grabs all the details from the Google Analytics cookies and returns back with the client ID detail. So the client ID, again, just to familiarize you with analytics, the client ID is this little part right here. So it's going into Google Analytics, pulls everything, parses out the client ID, and returns back with that. So I'm going to show you exactly how we would set this up using custom JavaScript. And it's going to be surprisingly simple. Paste it in. And again, I'm pasting it in because I already copied it. You could write this if you had the technical skills to do that. If you do not have the technical skills to do this, I think this is just an opportunity to start building those, right? So you can come in here and just try to figure out, okay, what exactly are they doing? Ask questions. Lots of people out there to help you in the community to pick up your JavaScript skills. And again, work with your developers on this. Your developer could write some custom JavaScript that might be useful for you. But in this particular one, it's actually going to return, assuming this works the way we expect it to, we're always going to TBV, especially when you start doing customized scripts like this. We expect that it's going to pull the client ID and then the value of this variable will be the client ID. So I'm going to say this is a custom JavaScript. So CJ, and this is going to be our client ID. So now we're going to save that, refresh our Google Tag Manager, then we will go in and refresh our main page. And let's take a look at how this works. So as we scroll through here, I'm just going to pull this to the side a little bit, make us a little bit more room. There we go. All right, so I have our variables. I'm going to go to the very, very first event, which is message here. I can go to our variables, and you can see that at this point in time, the JavaScript variable, our custom JavaScript variable, did not have anything defined yet for client ID. Then the page view happened. Now remember, at the page view, this is where we have our Google Analytics tag firings. This is where the cookies get set from Google Analytics. But at this point in time, this particular JavaScript variable does not yet have the information. So what about DOM ready? Okay, at this point, this is where the DOM is loaded in HTML. Again, we don't have the information. Then when the browser is loaded, everything is populated. You can see from this point forth, client ID exists. So from this point forth, I can pass through client ID, maybe even use it as something like a user ID. I might even be able to use that as a user ID if I was going into user ID tracking, or just passing it through as a custom dimension. I could still make this, even though my page view event happened here. By the time that this scroll depth trigger fires, where I've got my event coming through, I could pass through client ID as a session-based scope, and then as a custom dimension, and then that dimension would automatically apply to the page view. So that's how I can get client ID actually stored in Google Analytics, so that I might be able to use that. And again, this is just one very, very tiny examples. There are other things that you can do to set up to use custom JavaScript to get more done with Google Tag Manager. And I'm going to give you a link to one of Simo's posts that'll go through a ton of these just to give you some ideas. There's a lot to this. But again, I am not a JavaScript expert, nowhere near where a developer would be, or certainly like a master like Simo is. So, you can learn a lot from him, and as I do. So I would go to his blog and say, okay, this is what I'm seeing, and here's some cool ideas, maybe parse some of the things. But you can see how easy it is to actually set up, which is great, but also dangerous because it's easy to customize, put custom script on your pages. And this could have broke something. This is why you TBV. Now I'm just in preview mode. Ultimately, I might decide to go ahead and push it live, and then I would TBV again. So remember your workflows: trust but verify, trust but verify, trust but verify, TBV, TBV, TBV. Now, that is custom JavaScript. That's the one you will probably use the most of the two JavaScript variables. However, that said, I'm going to go into our Chrome Dev Tools we have pulled up. You are familiar with this from the GA debugger. And I'm just going to type in window here. And we're going to expand this. Again, this is just stuff that you will get familiar with. You can see here, I've got global variables that are available to me in the particular browser. It's my GA global. So I've got some global variables that are coming through. Let's say, for example, I wanted to pull this value, this HID value here. That is because it's already defined. I don't need a custom JavaScript variable. I can just use a regular JavaScript variable to pull this. And so I'm just going to go through and demonstrate this. Again, this may not be something you use all the time, but just know that it's available to you. So I'm going to go through here. We're going to set this up. And I'm going to use a JavaScript variable. We're just going to define where do I need to go look. That's what it kind of works like a data layer variable, with the exception of instead of going to the data layer itself and looking in that data layer object, it's going into the browser, and it's going to say, okay, well, go find me the JavaScript variable that matches this. So it's kind of can get a little bit more done. So in this case, I'm going to do GA global, remember case sensitive, and then .HID. So that's kind of gets me down that level. So GA global, case sensitive, .HID. Now I'm going to say go in and find that value. Again, do I have a use case for this? Not really, just to show you this. This is a JavaScript variable, and this is our HID. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Again, this is kind of what I like about Tag Manager, is being able to learn skills just by doing what I'm doing now. You can practice. Just do it because you can. Do it because you can practice it a little bit. We'll refresh. I'm going to refresh here. And now, with any luck, so I've got my page view event, and we've got our, again, client ID we already knew about. Then we've got our JavaScript ID, which is here. Notice that the page view event, it's not ready yet. Then the DOM ready, but at DOM ready, I do have the value. So that 140, I'm just gonna make sure it's actual, the one we want. So we're gonna type in window. This is just gonna give us access to the browser window and all the variables within. So there it is right there. So ends in 9140, ends in 9140. So again, I don't actually have a use case for this, but if I needed to grab that value for some reason, I could. And then you might find some other things that are in here. Maybe you've got a user ID that's stuffed in here somewhere that your membership software pops in there for you already. It's just a tool that you might be able to use. And again, if you are not technical, which in the beginning is the majority of people, that's okay. Get good enough to get going. Practice pulling out some different values here just so that you can practice, just to see it work. And once you have an idea of how this stuff works, including things like custom JavaScript and pulling the client ID that we did up here, once you have an idea of how they work, you naturally get better. You naturally get more comfortable. You naturally get more familiar. And then you and your developer can start having some really incredible conversations when it comes to custom JavaScript and JavaScript variables. So here's what we've covered. We've covered JavaScript variables. We've covered custom JavaScript variables. Custom JavaScript variables are there's an immense world to these. JavaScript variables, they sort of just give you access to whatever the browser's got access to, but custom JavaScript variables, That's a ton of stuff that you can do with these. You can set cookies with these. You can do all sorts of things with these, and you will use these over and over again, and you will see them used over and over again. Your lesson resources. First, Google's guide to user-defined variables in Google Tag Manager. Again, if you have not checked this out, make sure that you do. It'll help you lock down all the different variables that are available to you in GTM. Then Simo's post on 10 useful custom JavaScript tricks. Now, why check this out? Because you will get an idea of what's possible. You'll see a ton of stuff that he's doing back there, and just do other searches on Google for useful custom JavaScript tricks with GTM, and you will see other things that other people are doing. Does it mean you need to copy and paste every single one of them? No, of course not. But at least be familiar with what's possible. At least start getting familiar with JavaScript and understanding at least the very, very basics of how things work. Then when you come back to it, again, maybe you get good enough to get going. When you come back to it, you'll make it better. Also, check out JavaScript 101 for GTM. It's a post that Simo had written. Actually, I believe it was a two-part post that he wrote quite a while back, but definitely worth checking out. So if you are just getting started with JavaScript, make sure you check out JavaScript 101 for GTM. All right, your next steps. You see a pattern here. Get familiar with JavaScript if you are not already. If you are an expert, fantastic. You're already ahead of the game. There's just no way around that. You are ahead of the game. However, you do not have to be an expert to start using some of these tools. The better that you are at these, the better you are at JavaScript in particular, the more you will be able to do with Tag Manager. So the best way to get familiar with JavaScript is to start using JavaScript. Of course, make sure we TBV though. Practice using both table variable types. Again, you don't necessarily have to use it in implementation, but practice the JavaScript variable so you understand how that works. Practice the custom JavaScript variable so you understand how that works. And then use the browser dev tools to find existing variables, copy and paste things to start. I think that's perfectly fine. But remember, TBV, TBV, TBV. When you're copying and pasting code, it can be dangerous. If it's a tiny little WordPress site that's just yours, probably not that big a deal, but even that sometimes there's some things that can conflict. So make sure you're in preview mode. Make sure you remember your workflows. If you do publish live, make sure that you are TBVing after you publish live to make sure that the implementation that you did with your custom JavaScript or JavaScript variables is working the way you expect it to work and that you're getting a useful truth with your data. And as always, remember your developer. Your developer is a fantastic resource. They're going to love chatting JavaScript with you, and they might even help you write some of this because it's in their best interest as well. So definitely chat with your developer about this. Let them know what Tag Manager is able to do because you never know where they're going to be able to help. And once we've got those done, we are ready to move on.
There you have it. Deep dive event variables. At this point, you should be able to use event variables to control the timing of when certain actions are taking place in Google Tag Manager. Once you're ready, let's move on to deep dive, setting cookies in GTM.